Hi team, in this video we are going to look at skilled migration policy as a form of aggregate supply side policy. So you need to make sure you understand how skilled migration impacts population, productivity and participation, and we'll go through all three of those separately. We're going to link that to productive capacity and then obviously aggregate supply. And just like investment in infrastructure, we're then going to look at how it impacts international competitiveness, the goals and living standards. So the back end of this video should start to look quite familiar as we are presenting similar arguments, but obviously through a different policy. So what's going on with skilled migration in Australia? We've got two things happening in Australia at the moment in terms of our population. So number one, we've got a declining birth rate. So we've got fewer babies. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got an aging population. So we've got an older population, which means more individuals are exiting the labour force as they move into their retirement. So ultimately, this is not great news for the labour force. If we've got fewer babies coming in and more older people exiting, you've got to wonder what impact that's going to have on obviously the number of labour resources Australia has available to it, and then also the quality of those labour resources. So as individuals exit the workforce, the labour supply will diminish. And so a response to this problem is skilled migration as an aggregate supply side policy to identify those gaps in our labour force and try and obviously provide a solution. So this is the policy that you could use. There are others, but effectively the General Skills Migration Program. Think of that as your AOS policy, the General Skills Migration Program. It allows for immigration into the country based on points. And so basically those points are there to try to measure how valuable the international candidate's economic contribution will be. Obviously, the higher the points as per the system, the higher the likelihood that you will come into the country to provide your labour resources to our labour force. There's a little bit of extra detail here that you don't necessarily need to include, but effectively there's three avenues with which the program works. Number one, you might have an employer sponsor you. So an employer can recommend a candidate based on their special skills. So your employer, the Australian employer, might really want someone in particular from overseas, and so they will recommend them to come into the country through this program. Distinguished Talent Program is where someone is internationally recognised in their field and they gain access to the Australian workforce through those means. Or finally, Business Innovation and Investment Program. This attracts entrepreneurs with financial backing and a history of success in business. So three specific avenues with which someone from overseas might come to Australia as a skilled migrant. Okay, so there's a lot here on this slide. I recommend you pause the video, read it all, digest it before listening. But effectively, there's sort of, two prongs to this argument. It's a really great thing in the sense that Australia is obviously going to be able to get access to skilled migrants, and they're going to offer particular benefits to our country, but there's also some sort of downsides to that as well. So looking to the left-hand side, guys, successful immigration to Australia typically requires tertiary education and experience in a specific trade or profession. So these particular individuals have a lot that they can offer our workforce, okay? Migrants bring with them the skills and knowledge, including, and I've put this in highlight because it's really important, best practices and advanced production and management techniques. They're really good at doing the thing that they're here to do. So if we have a skilled migrant come into the country, it's because they're going to offer a specific skill that we've been unable to satisfy with our domestic labour resources. And so basically, they come and they provide that situation where we can enjoy improvements in productivity in our workforce, so increase output per unit of input, because they have those best practices and advanced production and management techniques ready to go. You then link that through to the improvement of aggregate supply that we've already spoken about, increased productivity, decreased cost of production, ultimately an increase in aggregate supply. The benefit here, on top of obviously contributing to the workforce, is that since these workers arrive fully trained, Australia avoids the cost of having to educate them. So from a domestic perspective, in some way or another, most of us enjoy subsidised education from the Australian government, and that costs lots of money. But in terms of a skilled migrant, that's not the case. They come here ready to go, and Australia has not had to obviously wear the cost of training them. However, some argue that promoting increased skilled migration could potentially lead to the de-skilling of Australian workers. So maybe instead of investing in training and education for their own employees, Australian businesses or Australian employers might opt to bring skilled labour from abroad to fill these roles. So if the argument here is if an employer chooses a skilled migrant over, say, a domestic worker, potentially that domestic worker has missed out on an opportunity to be upskilled such that they have the necessary skills. And this could make it more difficult for local workers to secure certain types of employment. And if you think about those individuals that are maybe missing out on that training and education, what could happen to their living standards in terms of their capacity to obviously develop the skills that they would then need to potentially increase their income or, access higher levels of employment, those kinds of things. So two sort of sides to the coin here, obviously making sure that you can speak to both of them. We need to go back to the key knowledge. And so basically we wanted to understand what was the impact of skilled migration on population, productivity, and the participation rate. Put simply, if we've got skilled migration into Australia, we're going to have more labour resources. So our population will go up because obviously these people are coming into the country to contribute. And so that quantity of labour resources are going to go up, and bringing it back to obviously the introduction to AS slides that we looked at, an increase in quantity should spell an improvement in aggregate supply simply because we have more labour resources. The other aspect is that there's an increase in quality / the labour productivity of these workers. Given they've been chosen or selected exclusively for the particular skills that they can offer, we should see an improvement in output per unit of labour input, as these workers by their very nature are highly skilled. And so there's your argument there for an improvement in aggregate supply. And then the other part here is that skilled migrants have a relatively high participation rate. They're here for a specific purpose. They need to be contributing in order to maintain their visa requirements. So just by the very nature of the fact that they've come into the country through the skilled migrant program, we're going to have higher participation rates for those individuals. And that should also spell supports or increases in aggregate supply. All right, so we need to go through to international competitiveness. This is where things will start to look a bit familiar. So if we have an increase in the quality and or quantity of labour resources, make sure you can explain the difference in that. Don't conflate quantity and quality. They're different, right? Quality is about the number. Quantity is about how much output is achieved per unit of input. Basically, if we've got skilled migrants coming into the country, it's going to put downward pressure on inflationary wage inflation. So if suddenly an employer has the option to, pick from more workers than just one, we're going to see a situation where wages aren't going to go out of control. Wages are a cost of production. So if wages are either declining or growing at a sustainable rate, which they should, we're obviously going to see that positively impacting the cost of production. The other aspect is best practices and advanced production and management techniques, which I've taken from the other slide, offered by skilled migrants allows for improvement in the production process. So if you've got someone with particular skills that's come in to support your production processes and they're really good at it because that's the thing they're here to do, we should enjoy higher output per unit of input, okay? So both these outcomes allow for producers to experience a reduction in the cost of production. We know that then supports an increase in output, which supports an increase in aggregate supply. This is also accompanied by a decrease in prices, so taking it back to that inflationary argument. If you are able to shift the aggregate supply curve to the right, we get that surplus of goods and services that puts downward pressure on inflation. That means Australian producers are going to be able to offer lower prices internationally, and that's going to make us more internationally competitive. So quite a lot there, guys, but basically make sure you can link skilled migration through to the increase in AS, and then the increase in AS through to improvements in international competitiveness. Once again, I'm not going to link to every goal. It's the same outcome as the video before, all right? So favourable for price stability, favourable for economic growth. Have a think about how's it going to impact full employment? Where are we currently at? What's this going to do to employment? Favourable or unfavourable for the goal? So this skill doesn't go anywhere. You've done this through Unit 4.1. We're now doing it through Unit 4.2. And then again, guys, linking it to living standards. So this again is I'm hoping it looks really familiar. The idea being that access to goods and services should increase. As prices fall, purchasing power is going to go up for Australians, and this leads to an improvement in access to goods and services, which increases my material living standards. Nice and simple. And then your quality of life factors, an increase in the number of skilled migrants. And I've gone the other way here. I've gone for a negative one. I've said, okay, well, if you've got more skilled migrants coming into the country, maybe that puts pressure on housing prices. We've got more people wanting to come and live in our capital cities or wherever. That's going to put an increase in on pressure in prices. causes prices to rise, leads to a fall in non-material living standards for those Australians who cannot access housing, as they might now be feeling higher mortgage stress because they have to pay higher prices for houses, or they're shut out altogether and they're stuck in the rental market. So just a bit of an alternative take there on non-material living standards. I'm sure you can dig around and find a positive story. There are many, but being really clear here, if the question asks about living standards, go deep. Talk about material or non-material, or potentially both, depending on how many marks the question's worth. Thanks, guys.